Welcome to our national forests. Magnificent and diverse forests stretching from coast to coast, managed for the public trust by the United States Forest Service, home to complex ecosystems and thousands of species of plants, wildlife, and microorganisms, and site of massive clear-cutting subsidized through tax dollars for private gain.
When somebody from Indiana or somebody from New Jersey looks at a highway map of the West Coast, they see all these neat green areas, and they think it's just forest and Smokey the Bear's out there protecting it. What they don't know is when they come out on their vacations and they get away from the highways, it's clear cuts.
God put the forest on here, and he put man on here to take care of it and harvest it. If he didn't, it wouldn't be here. If God didn't want us to use it, it wouldn't be here.
I don't believe that most of the people in the United States even understand that we've been cutting down the national forest and selling it to private enterprise.
Why is the Forest Service, protector of our national forests, home to Smokey the Bear and Woodsy Owl, selling off our natural heritage? Who's making money off these trees, and at whose expense?
It's a timber industry that's extremely powerful, that's putting pressure on the Forest Service and Congress to keep cutting the national forest even while they are exporting their own private timber at the expense of jobs, at the expense of community stability.
You know, what tax dollars are going to pay for clear cuts and roads, really subsidizing a special interest, which is the timber companies.
Those who are making the money doing, that's just good old-fashioned American greed. Individual greed occasionally has to be restrained for the better public good.
Are decisions to sell off public timber the result of good forestry or bad politics?
Every stick of timber that is sold off of public forests competes directly with privately owned timber, both for market share and for government subsidization.
The county would be bankrupt if the timber industry ceased today.
We want the Forest Service to start meeting the National Environmental Policy Act, the National Forest Management Act, the Endangered Species Act. In short, start meeting the laws that have already been passed to the intent and spirit that those laws were passed.
Old growth timber cutting now is like buffalo hunting back in the late 1800s.
The owls don't write letters and the bears don't vote, and the trees don't have any way to speaking to Congress.
Our American forests are vanishing. 90 to 95% of America's original forests are gone, with the exception of those in the Pacific Northwest. Experts believe that at the current rate of cutting, these forests will also be extinct in 20 years. National forests are not a major source of domestic timber. They account for just 13%. Most of our domestic timber comes from private lands. They're tree farms, selected species planted in even rows like corn or any other crop to be harvested for wood products. Native national forests are not tree farms. They're complex forests supporting a rich variety of species and life forms. But by clear cutting and replacing complex ecosystems with single species, we are jeopardizing valuable biological resources. By cutting down old-growth forests, virgin forests which predate Columbus, we are losing an irreplaceable national treasure. How have we come to this crisis in our national forests, and what can we do to prevent it? Can history provide us with any answers? Oregon State Forestry professor Dave Perry
ever since we settled down into agricultural villages and towns, we've been deforesting the earth. 6,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, what was the Fertile Crescent, there was a rich agricultural tradition that collapsed. For a long time we thought that was because of climate change. The evidence now says that it's quite different, that it was because of deforestation, that they logged their hillsides, they lost their soils, they lost their source of raw material for homes.
Ecologist and author Elliot Norse.
Once all of Europe was covered by forest, and today hardly any of it is. All the original forests of Europe are gone. Greece once was covered with trees, where it's now covered with scrubland. 2,500 years ago, Plato, famous philosopher, said that what was happening to the land of Greece, his land, was like what was happening when a body is stripped of its flesh, leaving only the skeleton, because the trees, which held the soil on Greece, as they were ripped away, the soil of Greece was washed off the mountains and into the ocean, exposing the bare rocks of the land.
Although we learned a lot from Plato and the ancient Greeks, when it comes to protecting forests, we haven't learned from their mistakes. Legend had it that the New World was a place of unlimited natural resources. America was indeed covered with a great forest. The woodlands provided early settlers with fuel and timber to build homes and ships. The forest was also a source of wealth for trade at a time when a deforested Europe had great need for timber. As America developed, enormous quantities of trees were needed to fuel our fireplaces, industries, steamboats, and railroads. By the 1860s, the destruction of forests was becoming evident. With an insatiable hunger for wood, the emerging timber industry demolished entire forests and moved on. The movement of the timber industry meant a cycle of boom and bust. Williamsport, Pennsylvania, for example, was the timber capital of America for less than 40 years. The rapid pace of cutting there resulted in a loss of soil. Without the forests and soil to absorb the rainfall, floods, like those depicted in the classic film The River, repeatedly devastated the communities and wiped out the structures built to transport the logs. And the industry moved west. In time, a pattern emerged. They cut out New England and moved to the south. They cut out the South and moved to the Lake States. They cut out the Lake States and moved to the Northwest. But there were people who recognized the destruction and the need to preserve the forest. Gifford Pinchot was the first professionally trained American forester. Pinchot studied in Europe. There were no American schools of forestry in the 1880s. George Vanderbilt hired Pinchot to manage Biltmore, Vanderbilt's estate in western North Carolina. There, Pinchot proved that selection cutting, choosing tree by tree which to extract and which to leave behind, could both improve the forest and be profitable. Recognizing the need to conserve timber in balance with its use, Congress in 1891 established forest reserves to improve and protect the forest, to protect watersheds, and to furnish a supply of timber. In 1906, these forest reserves became national forests under the leadership of Pinchot. His protective conservation principles guided Forest Service policy for the next 40 years. But after World War II, the balance between conservation and timber sales was disrupted. Veterans returned home. The economy was booming with massive housing construction. The Forest Service opened the national forest to unprecedented timber extraction. Before the war, less than 2% of the nation's wood came from national forests. But during the 50s, timber harvest just about tripled from 3 to almost 9 billion board feet. Everything about the Forest Service changed.
Yes, there are extra forest dollars growing in the soil, in the plants, and in the trees themselves, contributing to a better way of life and security for all of us.
The ranger's job in planning the layout of the transportation system for a timber sale is the most important part of National Forest Administration.
To get this increased cut out, methods like clear cutting prevailed on the national forests, where every species of tree, young and old, is cut at once, gashing the forest ecosystem. Retired forester Walton Smith witnessed these changes on the Nantahala and Monongahela national forests.
Always in the past on the national forest, we'd had a system of selection cutting, where you go in and cut more of the mature timber and leave the young growth to come on. All of the harvesting was done where we maintained a continuous canopy, and we had good game populations, and we had hunting and recreation along with timber harvesting at the same time. Back to why they do the clear cutting, it's the easiest thing in the world. You don't even need a forest. You go out and paint around 20 to 40 acres, and you turn a logger loose in there and say, cut it all right down to the ground. You can't damage anything. But if you're going to selectively cut this forest, you have to have a forester who knows each of the species, can select the proper trees to be cut, and more importantly, to leave the proper trees to take care of the biodiversity and the wildlife.
In the 1960s, the Forest Service developed the multiple use concept, which gave the illusion of satisfying all competing uses of the forest. But the clear-cutting continued. Even in the Pisgah National Forest, formed from Vanderbilt's Biltmore estate, the very forest for which Pinchot developed his principles of forestry 100 years ago.
Foresters basically, in my experience, believe the trees are there to be cut down. They call it harvest, but it means cut them down.
Brock Evans is critical of the Forest Service.
For 25 years, I've been hearing those people say, oh, we've changed our ways. Oh, we're going to do it differently from now on. Oh, that was a mistake. We're sorry. We won't ever do that again. And they do it again and again and again.
I want scenic forest. I want clear running streams that's full of fish, abundant wildlife, scenic beauty, and just a nice place to visit and a healthy forest. But the Forest Service is still in the timber business, and we're still going to sell timber to meet the needs of the American people within the new forest plans.
Among those calling for change are over 1,000 Forest Service employees. Jeff DeBonis started the Association of Forest Service Employees for Environmental Ethics.
We felt it was not meeting its obligation to the public trust. It was not managing the forest in a sustainable basis. To put it bluntly, it was basically a timber cutting agency, and it cut timber at the expense of other resources, wildlife values, fisheries values. It cut to the point where I saw personally lots of environmental degradation in terms of erosion, in terms of stream channel instability, washouts because of excessive road building, just a lot of environmental damage. Now, the Forest Service has a concept that says there's an amount of allowable degradation that we can do in order to get the timber harvest out. Well, a lot of us feel that allowable degradation has gone way too far. There's been way too much damage as a result of getting this inflated timber harvest level out. And we just felt it was time for us to do something, to say something, to speak up.
So here we are sitting in this old growth conference, hearing once again all this good research, hearing once again management people getting up there and saying things are groovy, things are really moving along, the Forest Service is really changing, and you could almost feel the palpable feel of people ready, 400 Forest Service employees in the audience, I could just tell that if one person just started going like this, we want change, the whole audience would have erupted. There was that much tension among the Forest Service employees in that group. Like any large bureaucracy, they tend to not want to change. They're established in their mode of operation. They get a lot of their funding through the timber appropriations process. So there's a lot of just plain dead bureaucracy that doesn't want to change, even though they know they have to. There's also a value system in the Forest Service that's perpetuated through forestry schools in the past, and a lot of the people that are in management positions now went through forestry schools in the 50s and 60s when it was the thing to do to, quote, manage forests for individual tree production, for getting the most wood off a piece of ground. So there's that value system that still hasn't really changed within the Forest Service. The public value system is changing much faster than that of the government or the agencies like the Forest Service.
In fact, some of us are thinking the U.S. Forest Service should not be the one to manage these forests. It should be some other agency, maybe a conservation agency. The citizens of New Zealand got so upset about 3 or 4 years ago about their Forest Service that they passed a special act of Parliament over there to split the Forest Service in two. And they gave most of the lands to another agency to be protected and just the tree farms to the loggers who were the Forest Service. I think we should do the same thing over here. The Forest Service, I don't believe, is fit to manage the public forest because all they want to do is cut down the trees.
Probably the gravest threat to Smokey is from Forest Service mismanagement.
The fire circus don't need Smokey anymore. All right? He's done his job and he served us well. But as far as we're concerned, y'all can have him, all right? Well, as the fire circus here today is going to unveil their new mascot. Stumpy the Stump! Stumpy is something we in the fire circus have been creating every day for a long time. And bears, they're almost gone. They're weak, unadaptable, but Stumps will be here forever. Like Woodsy Guthrie said, this land was made for you and Stumpy.
This land is your land, and this land is my land, from the California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I went a-walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway, saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me.
One reason forests are so valuable is that they harbor great biological diversity.
When astronauts leave the Earth, their lives are utterly dependent on their propulsion systems, their communication systems, and their life support systems. But here on Earth, the life support systems we need are living systems. The animals and plants and microorganisms, the diverse living things of this Earth, interacting with one another, clean our air, clean our water, break down our wastes, and provide us with all the food we eat. We are utterly dependent on the life support systems of this Earth. And the life support systems are biological diversity. The giant trees of an ancient forest perform valuable ecosystem services that we don't even usually think about. Douglas fir trees, 200, 250 feet tall, can have 60 million needles with a surface area of about an acre. These needles are a very efficient trap for pollutant particles. And every one of those particles that a tree traps and uses for nutrients is a particle that doesn't enter our lungs. This is an important consideration at a time when all Americans are concerned about clean air.
And when we look around at nature, what we see is that what makes it healthy and whole and resilient is the diversity and the connections within the system and the complexities of the system. These are the things we've been very busily getting rid of, and it's the things that we have to stop getting rid of and start preserving for the future.
We don't know how many species we might lose before we begin to really see a destabilizing effect on the biosphere. Someone has used the analogy of pulling rivets out of an airplane. You can pull rivets out of an airplane for a while and they'll still stay in the air. But after some point, you don't want to be on an airplane in which you pull more rivets out of.
It's unfortunate that we can't see the forest in cross-section. Because if we could see this tremendously diverse and complicated below-ground, underground system that links the forest together. In fact, between 50 to 80% of the net carbon fixed by this tree is diverted below ground. So you're seeing only a small portion of the forest. And the other portion is this tremendous web of life beneath the soil surface. And that's what recycles nutrients, picks up moisture, protects against pathogen, and keeps the system healthy.
Keeping the forest healthy protects our biosphere. We're now seeing how important the forests are in global issues such as climate change, oxygen, and water resources.
Scientists know that there are many reasons for protecting ancient forests. It's not just spotted owls. Here's one of them. This tree is called the Pacific yew, and its bark contains a chemical that has a very important property. It's a natural anti-cancer agent, and in clinical tests at the National Cancer Institute, it's proven very effective against ovarian cancer, non-small cell lung cancer, and malignant melanoma. The problem is that Pacific yews are now a very rare species. A century of logging has destroyed the ancient forests, the habitat where these trees live. They're so rare now that it's hard for the Cancer Institute to get enough to continue its clinical trials, because we've been logging the forests in a way that destroys them, not in a way that regenerates them.
George Attia is a former logger. Now he volunteers as a pilot for Project Lighthawk to show how overcutting on our national forests is destroying the ancient forests of the Pacific Northwest.
It just takes getting up in an airplane and seeing it from above to realize that places like this are very special because the trees aren't there anymore.
Medford Tower, Cessna 2776 Delta, we're ready to go. 3-2 straight out.
Just 5% is left. 5%. That's all that we have left. And we're still continuing business as usual, and the trees are still coming out of these forests as fast as possible.
What you see when you look out the window looks the same from British Columbia all the way to Northern California. It's just one big clear cut or one patch after another. It's like kind of like a moth-eaten blanket right now. If I could get everybody in the United States up in an airplane and show them what's becoming their national forest and these national treasures, I think this insanity would stop tomorrow.
This ancient tree behind us is over 1,000 years old, but like most of the ancient forest in the Pacific Northwest, it's not protected. These trees are truly national treasures. They're our last living link with the Middle Ages. And yet, in 15 minutes with a chainsaw, some fool could come up and knock it down, and we would make plywood and pulp out of it. I've spent the last 20 years of my life trying to protect this particular piece of forest called Opal Creek. And it's been a running battle, and yet, still, this is a national forest, but it is not protected. The Forest Service may at any day decide to come in here and sell us off and to the lumber company and destroy this whole forest. One of the things I think was most profound, so I looked at clear cuts that have been cut 20 years ago in the National Forest, clear cuts that are right up here on the top of Open Creek. There's no trees growing there. 20 years later, they don't have any trees growing. The soils are all gone. Looks to me very much like what we see in Brazil. I mean, where you cut down the forest and you burn it off and nothing comes back. That's what really made me say, this is not a renewable resource, especially up in these particular places, and we have to stop.
Trees have been thought of as a valuable resource only after they were cut down for timber. But scientists now understand the real values a forest provides can't be measured in board feet. The true value of an ancient forest is lost once the trees are felled. But not everyone agrees.
Well, old-growth timber is just dying timber, so it's going to die out anyway. So why not go in and take that timber, and then you leave the, some of the other trees till they mature, and then you take them out. But an old-growth tree is just a dying tree to me. That tree's going to die anyway, so why not harvest it while it's harvestable, rather than wait till it's just, why let it die and rot and fall on the ground?
An old log like this not only has roots, it has many microbes, many insects, and in fact, probably has far more living cells in it now when it's been down on the ground for 150 years than it did when it was standing up as part of a living tree. And the reason for that's very simple. They're great water reservoirs, and when the dry season hits these forests, as it does every year, this is where the moisture is to be found, therefore this is where the life is to be found.
People in the timber industry will tell you that if we don't cut all the giant trees now, they'll all rot and fall to the ground and go to waste. That argument's wrong for two reasons. For one, if they do die and fall to the ground, they're valuable. But the second, more important reason is these trees are long-lived. They live 500 years, 800, 1,000, sometimes 3,000 years. They're not going to die anytime soon unless we kill them.
The main argument for continuing the rapid pace of cutting on our national forests is to maintain jobs.
We've all logged so many years, and that's our trade. And if it all shuts down, we're going to have to turn around and start right from the bottom again.
If they can preserve the spotted owl, or they can preserve man as well.
When a mill closes or something, I just kind of close my eyes and turn around and say, what's going on here? There's not really much. You go up and you talk to a guy that worked there, and here he's been there 18 years, getting ready to retire. He's down the road. He's got 5 kids and a house payment and 2 cars. What's he going to do? And so I try not to talk to it. I just kind of close my eyes to it and say, God, what's up next? Who's closing next? Try to look ahead.
What causes a problem in looking at the long term versus the short term is when people focus too much on the forest as a source of immediate wealth and immediate employment. We have to be concerned about people's livelihoods, their ability to make a living out of things that come from the woods. But when we try to use the national forests as a social program to generate employment in rural areas as a priority, instead of thinking about the long-term health of the forest and its sustainability for all the things that people might expect, that's when things get out of balance a little bit.
The timber industry has been very effective in refocusing attention away from public timber subsidies and the need for sustainable forestry. They have launched ad campaigns around job loss issues.
Timber's been in our blood for generations, and hard work has been a way of life. But hard work isn't enough anymore. If people in Washington, D.C. don't understand, we're hurting. So let's stick together in the Northwest, get behind our members of Congress, and take one single message to Washington, D.C. There are people here, too.
Let our representatives know. We're counting on them.
This discussion of the workers caught in the middle, I think it's very unfair that people have said that the forest products industry, from the independent manufacturers up to the Fortune 500 companies, are playing on the fears of the workers by saying, look at all these jobs we're going to be losing.
But do the workers and the timber industry share the same interests? Many jobs have already been lost to industry automation. High-tech lasers are used. Automated assembly lines carve logs into boards or peel them into veneers.
The timber industry says they're concerned about jobs, but they're automating. They're exporting lots of logs overseas, logs, not finished products. So if the timber industry was really concerned about jobs, they would be behaving differently. In fact, they're concerned about profit.
The same industry that decries the loss of jobs is profiting heavily by exporting whole logs. Old-growth logs bring nearly twice the price in Japan that they do in the United States. Small private mills here can't compete. In 1991, over 3 billion board feet of logs were exported from the Pacific Northwest. Exporting whole logs reduces the work available for local mills and wipes out jobs. Analysts believe that by cutting log exports in half, we could save 20,000 to 30,000 jobs. Shipping off our valuable resources only increases industry pressure to cut more trees from the depleted ancient forests.
A relatively small number of people in Washington, Oregon, and California make their living cutting ancient trees, and those ancient trees are fast disappearing. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we willing to eliminate the greatest conifers in the world, the most remarkable coniferous forest on Earth, to provide a few more years of employment of people who are going to be out of work anyway, and those forests are gone, and they're going fast. When whalers sailed the high seas and killed the great whales, they made a lot of money. As a matter of fact, many New England families that are prominent and wealthy to this day owe their money to whaling. But as whales were depleted and pushed toward extinction, whalers fought tooth and nail to preserve their privilege to kill the greatest animals, the largest animals on this earth. Now we're seeing exactly the same thing happening in the Pacific Northwest. The people, the small number of people who've made a great amount of money in that land, and the people who work for them, are fighting tooth and nail for their privilege, what they call their privilege, to kill the last great virgin forests on this planet.
New forestry, or new perspectives, is the Forest Service's latest forest management approach. It attempts to keep forests relatively intact while extracting timber.
We're trying to make some changes. We are making changes in the Forest Service. And this program we call New Perspectives is basically how can we manage the national forest in a more environmentally sensitive way and perpetuate all these values that people value in the forest through time.
I believe the most important thing we can do is to manage for complexity, because complexity is the key to the resilience or the robustness of these systems. And like we did in this stand here, where you manage for a wide variety of species, both plant species and animal species, and maintain those essential below-ground organisms. That's the key. You look at this forest, you've harvested timber, you've maintained the root systems intact for watershed, for water quality, you've got a great species mix coming in, you've got big trees that can resist fire with their thick barks, you've stimulated a lot of natural regeneration, you have downwood, you maintain the soil humus layers, all these components of the forest that keep them healthy. You have hardwood species coming in, which are really important in the types of organisms that they support. You have a complex forest, and it's been managed. There's no reason why we can't do that on all forest acres.
While some ecologists find new forestry promising, others feel that old-growth forests have already been overcut, and that unless there is a fundamental change, Forest Service policies, no matter how enlightened, will lead to the same excessive cutting on our national forests. Career Forest Service employees are caught in the conflict over the high timber sales quotas and meeting environmental laws which seek to protect forest lands and endangered species.
The Forest Service has lost its historic role as a leader in a good conservation ethic and public trust management of the national forest. They've lost that. And one of the great things that's happening now is that there are Forest Service employees all over the United States that are starting to speak out publicly.
But there is a price to pay for those who are more loyal to the public trust than the agency, or those that blow the whistle.
I do.
Nowhere is this more apparent than in the northern Rockies region of the National Forest. John Muma, a wildlife biologist and 31-year veteran of the Forest Service, was removed as regional forester for planning to reduce timber sale targets after he and Forest Service supervisors concluded that they couldn't meet environmental standards for watersheds and wildlife under current forest plans.
Political pressures that I've experienced are related to a number of things, but include compliance with timber, including timber harvesting in the forests I have responsibility for. These targets are pursuant to Forest Service estimates, which are now in some cases unattainable because meeting them would require us to violate other laws.
The Forest Service defends existing forest plans even when they sacrifice environmental guidelines.
We got to have some stick-to-itiveness to these plans and not just go off the next year and say, well, now we can't carry out those forest plans. And I've been using the forest plans and dealing with the Congress and saying what needs to be done. And so we're either committed to those forest plans or not. And I'm committed to them.
The Bush administration, through its surrogates at the Department of Agriculture and its subordinate agency, the United States Forest Service, support the status quo.
To the extent that harvesting is prescribed by the forest plans over the next 20 to 30 years, it will necessarily consist mainly of old-growth timber.
While the administration has backed away from hard decisions regarding the fate of the ancient forests of the Pacific Northwest, they have convened a so-called God Squad that can overrule protection plans called for under the Endangered Species Act. The burden of action has fallen to the United States Congress. While Congress has heard much testimony, the deeply divided body has failed to act to change Forest Service policies and practices. While many see the need for reform, others are more concerned about short-term job losses in their districts than the long-term health of forest ecosystems.
Meanwhile, as the crisis continues year after year unresolved, the remaining stands of ancient forests shrink, and the unique biological diversity moves from threatened to endangered. The dependent enterprises are weakened by uncertainty, workers are losing their jobs, and rural economies deteriorate. Without action, both people and forests are hurt.
Nobody's concerned about the elimination of jobs and people, I guess, anymore. All we want to do is for some scientists somewhere to say that we've got to stop harvesting timber in the Northwest. I hear my time is up, Mr. Chairman, but I'll tell you this. There are a lot of people whose jobs, 71 communities in Oregon, who depend upon the timber industry, over half of the income. You're going to put them out of work. You're going to create refugees, and I don't see the purpose of it.
Others see the potential for many jobs in forest restoration.
Again, restoration will be a prominent component of any management strategy I think that scientists would recommend for that region. And I think restoration in general offers an opportunity to employ a lot more people than cutting down the last remaining old-growth forests.
From testimony, it's clear the spotted owl is not the only endangered species affected by the loss of old-growth forests.
It is not just the spotted owl. It is not just a collection of endangered species. It is a problem of endangered ancient forest ecosystem. The choices are now clear, and it's really an easy choice to make if you take the long-term view. And so Congress is going to make that choice, either consciously to save these forests or through inaction let these forests be cut down.
The basic problem is that for too long, for years and years, a small band of politicians from the Pacific Northwest have been meeting mostly in closed sessions in the appropriations committees and making very basic decisions at the bidding of the timber industry, which have resulted in the extermination of this national treasure, the ancient forest. We've gone to the appropriations committees. We pleaded with them. We begged them. We said, please don't do this. These are national treasures. Here's our maps. Here's our documentation. We're losing it. You're cutting it faster than the Amazon forest right now. It's in wildlife recreation. All these things are important too. Please don't do it. Here's what we recommend instead. We got the back of the hand.
The national forest belongs to everybody. In that respect, they also belong to these communities out here that derive their basic industry from. And I truly believe that if this issue of public land use were left in the region or left in the local communities, that we could find a solution, that we could work through it as a community. We do it through county government, we do it through city councils, we do it through state government. I believe that we could reach the compromise that we need, or the balance that needs to be there.
The timber industry is very powerful in the Pacific Northwest, and we decided several years ago if we were going to save these forests, it would have to be the people of the nation saving them, not environmentalists or Oregonians. The politics just aren't there in Oregon. Expecting the Oregon congressional delegation to rationally deal with the end of ancient forest cutting in 1990 is like expecting the Mississippi delegation in 1960 to deal rationally with the end of segregation. Both delegations may know that it's wrong and it's about over under any circumstance, but politically they're powerless to really deal with the issue.
For a long time, I thought the villain in this whole thing was the Forest Service or maybe the timber companies. And the more I thought about it, I realized the villain is the United States Congress. They were the trustees and still are the trustees of the National Forest, and they manage the trust fund for the people of the United States. And in order to further their own political careers, they have robbed the trust fund. In fact, what we see here is very similar to what happened with the savings and loans. And the Northwest delegation has been robbing the trust fund in order to keep our economy pumped up, very much like other parts of the country have defense contracts or public work projects. Our delegation brought back free or very low-cost federal timber. So you can only rob the trust fund for so long, and you're going to be out of trees.
We're lucky we live in a political system that gives full play to the expressions of the people who want to do something different. Every national park that was ever existing right now was fought for just like the ancient forests are being fought for and was protected by people who care.
The role of the public is extremely important, particularly now because it's the public that is that is becoming increasingly aware of what's going on the national forests. And they're having a major effect on changing the politics in Congress. There are senators and congressmen now from the East, from the Midwest, from the South, that are taking an interest, for example, in the Northwest old-growth controversy, and that's unprecedented.
In the southern Appalachians, like in many regions of the National Forest, clear-cutting is environmentally destructive, and it's being subsidized with your tax dollars. It's called below-cost timber sales. The Forest Service loses money by not charging the timber companies which cut the trees the full costs of road building and preparing for the sale. North Carolina's Pisgah Forest is one of 74 national forests that consistently have below-cost sales at the taxpayer's expense.
Back when I was active in the Forest Service in the 50s, we didn't have any such thing as what we call below-cost sales. All of the sales we made with uneven age management and selection harvesting made money, and we put more money into the treasury than the Forest Service used to pay all of its people. Whereas in the last 2 years, the Nantahala-Pisgah National Forest has lost over $2.5 million each year on the clear cutting that they've been pursuing.
This combination of environmental destruction financed through tax dollars sparks a great deal of controversy.
Well, I've never seen a clear cut around here. It looks too good yet. I'm 52 years old, and I've seen them ever since I was a kid, and they ain't looking that good to me right now. You kids, We'll probably never see nothing in the clear cut. It'll never grow back up. The cows did take it 100 years. When you cut everything to the ground, you ain't got nothing left for them.
I'd rather see the beautiful forests as to see the clear cutting. It's more valuable to everyone for the sake of the beauty of the community and for all the hunters and the animals.
The Western North Carolina Alliance is organizing citizens who want to change forest practices in the region.
We are an organization that somebody that's a bear hunter would like to join, as well as people that are environmentalists or wouldn't like to hunt. We've got housewives, farmers, just a broad spectrum of people. Everyday people are environmentalists. Everybody cares about the quality of their community and the quality of life. They like to fish or hunt or gather berries, or many of them work in the woods, but as Walton said, they just don't see the sense of clear cutting.
The Alliance mobilized public opposition with a Cut the Clear Cutting campaign, organizing a petition drive and public rallies to prove to the Forest Service they were speaking for the public.
And maybe it's time for us to come back home to a way of evaluating life that considers things like peace and beauty and permanence and each other's benefit and welfare. Maybe it's time for us to remember that the issue we're really speaking here to is whether or not we are being graced with the privilege of pursuing life, liberty, and happiness without being cut off at the pass by a very small group of self-interest folks who treat this land as nothing but a resource to be used for their own personal short-term benefit.
The Alliance gathered 15,000 names on a petition and presented it to the local Forest Service supervisor.
We're joining tonight.
We come today, Supervisor Dahl, bringing you not only ourselves, but the names of over 15,000 citizens from throughout Western North Carolina and the region. They are asking you and the Forest Service, and especially our congressional representatives who give you your budgets, to manage our national forests more effectively for multiple use. Here's a
The Alliance's public campaign left an impression on Forest Service Supervisor Bjorn Dahl.
Well, we certainly had a great outcry, and we've had thousands of names on petitions. We've had peaceful demonstrations. We've had people chaining themselves to our door in my office to show how much they care about what their views are. We have, in fact, recently published an amendment to the forest plan where we have removed the words clear cutting as the optimum timber harvest method, and we've replaced it by good thinking and site-specific analysis and evaluation will determine the harvest method.
It's going to regenerate primarily with power.
Like citizen-based forest watch groups nationwide, the Alliance is continuing to work with and monitor the Forest Service to ensure that their changes in policy translate to changes in practices. While Congress debates these issues, we are losing tens of thousands of acres of ancient forests. People like George Atiyah are determined to change federal policies which are obliterating old-growth forests.
One of the most important benefits of this place, or these forests, are the spiritual values that they provide. This place is my church. These trees are my cathedral. I walk through them, and this is where my peace is. And I found in my life that most people have a hole inside them. And they're all always trying to fill it up with different things. Some people try to fill it up with dollars, or some people do it through their work. Or some people take drugs. But I haven't found anybody who can come up to one of these forests and walk out away from everybody and sit down in the moss and look up at a tree. It still has the hole. It's gone. These trees, this ancient forest in the Pacific Northwest is owned by the people of the United States. These are national forests. And yet they've been managed to the benefit of a few mill owners and to support local economies. And they forgot who really truly owns them. The people of the United States own these forests. Like a lot of people in Oregon, started out as part of the timber industry. My family's been involved in the timber industry for 4 generations now. And it's been very hard to make the change, to understand that our way of life has changed, that the trees that we depended upon and the forests we depended upon are gone. And as a nation, we have to make the decision, do we want to continue to cut the last of the trees and with no place else to go, or do we save them? Do we save something for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren?
Logging has been a traditional way of life in Oregon. Change does not come easily, nor is it easy for those who seek it.
I guess I've paid a tremendous price. I think the rewards have been worth it for me because these trees still stand and it's still beautiful. But it's been very hard. I mean, I've had a lot of death threats. People have threatened me. They threatened my family. My daughter was held down in school. They tied yellow ribbons around her, which is the symbol of the timber industry. When I go and watch my children, my boys play football at the high school, nobody will sit within 2 benches of me. My businesses have been boycotted. They've made it very hard to stand up. At the same time, I didn't have any choice. I had to. People need to recognize that we have to stay in touch with the earth. It is truly what will fill up the hole and sustain us spiritually and physically. And I don't want to see that destroyed in the pursuit of the almighty dollar. I think it has to be saved.
Beth Howell works to protect Oregon's Siskiyou Mountains. She argues that as consumers, we play a critical role in the health of the environment.
I think the average person can just look around and say, wow, in my own lifetime, the destruction I have seen in the environment is tremendous. We are the consumers of the greed. We are the consumers of the products that these forests are being raped for. And it's up to us to change the way we live. The world isn't there for our convenience. It is our life support system. And we have to live in harmony with it if we want to continue to be supported.
Forests are one of the great renewable resources that we have. They're a kind of land and a community of organisms that can provide us with things that we need, like wood and water and recreation, and continue to renew that year after year after year. But there are limits to how much you can take from that forest and still have it be a healthy, renewable system.
We have to all live sustainably. We all have to live within the system that the planet provides. And if we start destroying that very system, all the money in the world won't help you if you don't have clean water and air to breathe and the beauty of these forests around you.
Now we're learning what our ancestors probably knew very well, that when we look around at what's happening in the globe today, there are forces set in motion by us that we can't control. We cannot control nature. We're a part of nature, and rather than standing outside of it. And that's what we have to learn. And then we also have to learn, what do we do? How do we utilize nature and at the same time preserve it for future generations?
The toughest challenge is to get people to work together. The jobs versus environment issue has done nothing but to polarize people. And to really, we're at the time now where we need to forget those agendas and begin working together towards a solution.
We live in a democracy, and I hope every American feels that they are part owner of these national forests, and that they get involved, and they let not only the Forest Service, but everybody know what they expect out of these national forests.
As Woody Guthrie said, this land is your land. The American people have to make the decision of whether they want to protect the forests of this country or not. The way you make that decision is by writing or calling your congressmember or senator and telling him or her what you want.
People becoming aware and writing their congressmen and pressuring their congressmen for change on national forest policy, stating that these are my national forests as well and I want to have a say on what's going on, are having an effect. Definitely having an effect. And at the local level, there's community and grassroots movements that are becoming the watchdogs of the Forest Service and other federal agencies that have a dramatic effect on those agencies directly.
We have great power, we humans, to bring change to this world. But we also have responsibility that goes along with that power. These forests have been on Earth for millions, for tens of millions of years. We have the power to destroy them. Do we have the sense not to destroy them?
When the sun comes shining, then I was strolling, and the wheat fields waving, and the dust clouds rolling. The voice was chanting as the fog was lifting. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land, and this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from redwood forests to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. When the sun comes shining, then I was strolling, and the wheat fields waving, and the dust clouds rolling, the voice coming chanting, and the fog was lifting. This land was made for you and me.
Funding for this program was provided by the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, the W. Alton Jones Foundation, the George Gund Foundation, and the Pew Charitable Trusts.
This is PBS.